All right, let's jump right into this fascinating sociological journey of how the very concept of the family and parenthood is shifting right before our eyes. Welcome to this explainer, where we're going to unpack the incredibly complex, life-altering experience of becoming a parent. We tend to think of having kids as just this simple biological inevitability, but as we'll see from the data, it's actually a profoundly social and cultural phenomenon. It changes how society views us, and honestly, how we view ourselves.
To get our heads around this sprawling topic, we're going to trace the chronological arc of life through 5 key stages: the choice to parent, pregnancy, birth, and adoption, taking on new roles, strategies for raising children, and finally, caregiving throughout the lifespan.
Let's kick things off with Section 1, the choice to parent. Because today, more than ever, this is a conscious choice.
So before we even touch on the emotional weight of parenthood, we really have to ask ourselves about the literal financial cost. In our modern economy, deciding to expand a family is easily one of the most significant financial calculations a person can make. Brace yourselves because the sticker shock here is real. When you factor in the whole shebang, prenatal care, day-to-day childcare, lost wages from stepping back from work, and eventually college tuition, the total cost of raising a child can soar up to $2 million. Yep, you heard that right, $2 million. That is an immense financial pressure, and it completely shifts the narrative of when or even if people decide to start a family.
With costs like that, it's honestly no surprise that fertility rates have dropped 12% from their all-time high. This decline is largely driven by 3 distinct populations of women. First, you have those who are temporarily childless. Often they're younger and college-educated, delaying parenthood to finish their degrees or build a career. Then there are the involuntarily childless. Roughly 11% of U.S. women between 15 and 44 experience impaired fecundity or difficulty conceiving. And finally, there's a growing demographic, those who are childless by choice. These voluntarily child-free couples often have higher levels of education and income, and they're prioritizing different paths to self-fulfillment, even if they sometimes face a bit of societal stigma for it.
Moving on to Section 2, pregnancy, birth, and adoption.
For those who do make the choice and take the leap, the realities are intensely physical and deeply emotional. Pregnancy isn't just a biological event, it's a deeply psychological, trimester-by-trimester journey. In the first trimester, alongside physical symptoms like nausea and painful breast swelling, there's often a profound fear of the unknown. By the second trimester, the physical distress usually subsides, but psychological concerns about changing bodies take center stage. And then the third trimester brings intense daily living difficulties due to size and water retention, not to mention major anxiety about the impending birth. This journey fundamentally shifts a couple's relationship. It requires a totally new level of communication and support.
Looking strictly at the numbers, we see that of the 6.4 million pregnancies recorded in the U.S. back in 2009, they resulted in a real variety of outcomes. 65% resulted in live births, 17% in induced abortions, and 17% ended in fetal loss. This really highlights that the path to birth is absolutely not always linear. Many individuals face incredibly difficult decisions or heartbreaking losses along the way that just aren't talked about enough in the broader cultural conversation. Now, when it comes to the actual delivery, there's this fascinating sociological tug-of-war going on. On one side, you have the critique against the heavy medicalization of modern hospitals, where childbirth can feel like an impersonal, institutional process, sometimes resulting in unnecessary C-sections. On the flip side, the feminist approach and the women's health movement advocate for treating birth as a natural, fundamentally healthy process that should be minimally managed. It's a really complex debate about who actually holds the power and control during the birthing experience.
Which brings us to Section 3, taking on new roles.
The literal second that child arrives, everything changes, and individuals instantly take on entirely new societal expectations. Society often pressures mothers with this ideal called intensive mothering. It's the belief that being a good mom requires labor-intensive, total self-sacrifice, which sadly often derails women's professional earnings by placing them on less demanding mommy tracks. Meanwhile, the cultural expectations for fathers are shifting toward the nurturant father. Fathers today have actually doubled their housework and tripled their time with children since 1965. But despite that awesome progress, an unspoken double standard definitely still exists in how we judge moms versus dads.
Sociologist Alice Rossi completely nailed why this transition is so incredibly jarring for new parents. She mapped out 5 stark realities. First, parenthood has strict irreversibility. You cannot hit undo. Second, there's a severe lack of preparation, largely because, number 3, society heavily idealizes and romanticizes babies. Then there's the suddenness. Unlike a career where you train for years, parenthood happens in the literal instant of birth. And finally, role conflict, as you scramble to figure out how to be a parent while still trying to be a partner, a professional, and, well, a person.
And you know, what's really crucial here is that the mold for who fills these parent roles is expanding. Sociological data, notably researched by Patterson, consistently shows that the structural makeup of the parents, and this includes same-sex couples, doesn't negatively impact the child's development. Whether we're looking at gender identities, self-concept, moral judgment, or intelligence, children of gay and lesbian parents fare just as well as children of heterosexual parents.
All right, Section 4, Strategies for Raising Children.
So the roles are set, but how do you actually raise them? Sociologists generally point to 4 well-known styles of child rearing, and they're shaped by 2 main things: how responsive parents are to a child's needs and how demanding they are about expectations. You have the authoritarian style, which demands absolute obedience and is punishment-heavy. Then the permissive style, which values freedom and is highly indulgent. There's the uninvolved style, which is basically low on everything, disconnected. And finally, the authoritative style, which balances clear behavioral expectations with high responsiveness and positive reinforcement.
But it's not just about those basic psychological parenting styles. A family's ethnic and cultural background plays a massive role in socialization. Many minority families focus on instilling a profound sense of community, obligation, and interdependence within the family unit. But at the exact same time, they have to navigate the complex task of actively preparing their kids for harsh societal realities, getting them ready to face down discrimination and prejudice in the wider world.
Let's bring it full circle with Section 5, Caregiving Throughout the Lifespan.
As kids grow and parents age, the dynamics flip. It's truly fascinating to see who steps in when the traditional structure breaks down and biological parents are absent. Looking at children living in non-parental households in 2018, grandparents are overwhelmingly the backbone of these family units, making up 54% of these living situations. Grandparents aren't just passing down history. In millions of cases, they are literally stepping right back into the daily grind of child rearing.
And this extended caregiving leads us to a huge modern phenomenon, the sandwich generation. Because young adults are delaying traditional milestones, staying in school longer, living at home, and because older generations are living longer, middle-aged folks are finding themselves squeezed right in the middle. They're tasked with the immense stress of simultaneously caring for their aging parents on one side and their own dependent children on the other.
Then, on the flip side of that equation, you've got what sociologists call parentified children. This is where the typical life cycle flips prematurely. Due to things like illness, addiction, or severe economic hardship, kids are forced into the caretaker role. They have to take on heavy adult responsibilities for their own parents way before they even reach adulthood themselves.
Ultimately, as we close out this life cycle, the data shows a really stark reality about elder care. The burden still falls heavily along gender lines. The concept of filial responsibility is strong, but it's predominantly women, daughters and daughters-in-law, who act as the family kingkeepers. They're the ones carrying the bulk of the emotional, physical, and logistical stress of elder care, which research shows frequently leads to greater distress and a decline in happiness.
Through all this complex data we've looked at today, the $2 million price tags, the trimesters of pregnancy, the diverse family structures, and aging parents, one universal truth just cuts through the noise. Harmony and connection trump absolutely everything else. Whether a family is headed by a single parent, a same-sex couple, or grandparents, the quality of love and the stability within those walls is what truly dictates a child's well-being.
So, as we wrap up this explainer on the modern family's incredible journey, I want to leave you with a thought. Where do you currently stand in this cycle? Whether you're weighing the cost of a future child, finding yourself squeezed in the sandwich generation, or just reflecting on how you were raised, how are your own choices shaping the future of the family? Thanks for joining me today, and I hope this gave you a really clear, engaging new way to view the evolution of parenthood.